We are not of this world. We are Media Arts, Radio Zion. Welcome to Mars.
You're listening to Martial Art Masters of Texas with your host, the voice of Texas martial arts, Master Steve Pinder.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Martial Art Masters of Texas. And today we're going to be talking about Christianity and martial arts. And I couldn't think of having a better guest on than Grandmaster Keith D. Yates. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to be here with you.
Okay. I think it'd be best for the people that don't know of you, and I can't imagine many people out there that don't know of you, especially in this field. Why don't you give a brief background on yourself?
Okay, well, I started karate training with Alan Steen in 1964. One of his early students in the Texas Karate Institute, which, as some people know, was the first karate school in Texas. And in fact, my home school was that first karate school down by SMU. I made a black belt in 1968. And started teaching at Mr. Steen's schools, actually, while I was still a brown belt, because he didn't have very many black belts there at the time. And I taught continuously up until just 2 months ago. In fact, I retired from teaching at the YMCA in Richardson and Garland. But I'm continuing to teach. I teach black belt classes. In fact, I taught a Tai Chi class this morning. So I've been teaching continually for, gosh, how many years that is, 55, almost 60 years now. I competed for a number of years as a young black belt. Of course, I was a teenager, so I wasn't able to travel to places like New York and California, but I did compete all across the Southwest and won a few sparring trophies, but mostly kata. Mr. Steen called me the kata man at the Texas Karate Institute. And I ended up learning all of the new forms as we made the transition from Tang Soo Do to Taekwondo forms. So, yeah, I've been around for decades.
Wow. Now, from where you started, did you bring Christianity into your martial arts?
Well, I got saved as a young man. So I was a believer even during those years that I was training with Mr. Steen as a teenager. Later on, as ironically, I took at the school across from SMU, and later I became an SMU student, and in fact taught at SMU for a number of years as well. And it was that time that I graduated from college. I actually served as a counselor at Sky Ranch, which is a Christian youth camp, and there kind of really got serious about my faith and started to integrate that into my martial arts. Interestingly, teaching at the YMCA, YMCA stands for Young Men's Christian Association, but it's really more of a secular organization. So I never did anything like start each class with prayer or anything, but all of my students certainly knew where I was coming from. And then later, as I started working at Dallas Theological Seminary, in fact, an interesting story, a seminary professor came in, one of my fellow professors came in, and he said, I have to apologize to you. And I said, well, what for? And he said, well, I found out that you were a martial artist, and I was concerned about the whole aspect of martial arts and Buddhism. And he said, I went to the president of the seminary, and I said, did you know that Keith Yates is a martial arts instructor? And the president of the seminary said, "Yeah, he's teaching my grandkids." So, so that particular professor did some study on the martial arts and then came to me to my office and apologized and said, "Well, I just had a misunderstanding about the martial arts." Now, at the time, I was working at the seminary, but I hadn't finished my degree yet, my master's in theology. And so I thought, gosh, if this is really a problem for some Christians, I decided to do my master's thesis on the spiritual aspects of the martial arts, which
Ah.
later I graduated from there and turned it into a book, and then became associated with a couple of Christian martial arts organizations. So the Lord just kind of brought me on this whole path of trying to integrate my faith with my martial arts practice.
Wow. So let's just start to list some. I mean, besides the being able to teach children and speak into their lives of, good values, Christian
Right.
morals, and everything else, what do you think? Is there an advantage? And I'd like you to explain. And I know there is, but I'm just asking you: is there an advantage over having a secular karate school versus having, or I should say, having a Christian karate school versus a secular karate school? What would be the advantages?
Well, it depends on where you're teaching. I mean, if you have your own commercial school, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And I
Mm-hmm.
know several instructors who have a Christian emphasis in their schools. Now, if you're teaching like I did at a YMCA or at a rec center or at college, I've taught in colleges too. Sometimes you can't really integrate Christianity from a very overt method, but you can certainly shine as an example of a Christian instructor. And over the years, I've had, I probably have a couple hundred black belts under me. And I would say the majority of them are believers just because, they know me and they've either sought me out because I'm a believer or hopefully they've seen Christ shine through me and become interested. And I've led several of them to the Lord just because of my position in the martial arts. And I think that's important for those of us who are senior martial artists and believers that we use this as a platform. We're not trying to force something down somebody's throat,
Yep.
but just by our example, hopefully people will say, well, there's something different about that person. And it's interesting that the martial arts are supposed to teach, the tenets, courtesy, humility, integrity, so forth. And I believe they do. But you and I have both seen plenty of martial artists who lose in a tournament and then they throw their clothes down and cuss, or maybe they lose their temper in class. And so, even though I believe that the martial arts certainly can teach character and humility, ultimately, I think our faith in Christ is the only thing that's really gonna do that. No secular activity can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard students, and I've gone to other schools where these 10-year-old kids can just list those tenets, pop, 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 go right through them. Then you ask them, can you give me an example of each one of them?
Right.
And they can't. So if they're just repeating the tenets, it doesn't mean they're learning the tenets.
Oh yeah.
So,
Well, one of my black belts, Jenny Tyler, has written a series of books on taking the tenets of the martial arts and then using scripture to expand on each one of those. And in fact, I mean, this is a plug for her. It's called Mat Time, and so she's got a whole series of devotions that she's put together, and she's got her own Christian school up here north of Dallas. And so I think her books are still available on Amazon. So for any Christian instructor that's interested in taking the tenets of the martial arts and explaining them from a scriptural point of view, those are excellent resource materials. And the Gospel Martial Arts Union, which I'm a member too, is another great resource.
now, did you start the Gospel Martial Arts Union?
No, it was actually started back in the 1980s by a couple of pastors who were black belt instructors, and so they started this organization. In fact, this is another interesting story. I've written 16 books, and so years ago, one of the founders of the Gospel Martial Arts Union called me, and he said, "Hey, I just finished reading your book. I found your contact information. You sound like you're a Christian? I said, well, yes. And he said, well, I have this organization for Christian martial artists. I'd love to invite you to come. And so I went down to Florida and taught at one of their conferences and was associated with them for a number of years. And they invited me to sit on the board of the organization. So, I mean, that's just another example of whether you're teaching in class or writing articles or books. If you allow the Lord to shine through you, you're influencing other people, believers and non-believers as well.
Wow. Now, for me, when I decided to start teaching after coming to Texas,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine having a secular school.
Yeah.
I just, as if I'm going to remove Jesus from that part of my life. So he had to be in it. So I in deep prayer was just, constantly praying and trying to figure out, waiting for that revelation, those words to come back to tell me the direction to go in. And
Right.
I was talking to you a little bit earlier. I was asked to do a demonstration at a tournament. And the person that ran the tournament was not a believer of any kind whatsoever. I would call him more of a new age. He was into the crystals and the smudge sticks and all the Eastern
Right.
mysticism and all that. And, that was his thing. That's fine. And when he told me, I said, so what do you want me to do? He goes, whatever you want. You have 15 minutes. I go, you sure? You want me to, you're going to give me open reign? And he goes, yes. Okay, so I prayed and fasted for weeks before this. I got no word.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what I was going to do. And I'm like, do I have to wing this and just wait for you to give it to me on the spot? I wanted his words. This was an important thing. There was going to be 500-600 people at this tournament.
Yeah.
So I remember praying that morning, and I was driving to work. I was working in Dallas at the time, and I'm running late. And I remember looking at the time and going, there is no way I'm going to be able to clock in on time.
Yeah.
Because I got the math in my head. I'm going to drive it 60 miles an hour. There's no way I'm going to get there in time. And when I'm driving, I'm looking at my speedometer, and I'm doing 60, and it looked like everybody was in slow motion.
Yeah.
And I get to work, and I clock in, and I'm 2 minutes early. Mathematically, it was impossible.
Yeah.
So I sit down at my desk, and I go, okay, Lord, you got my attention. What's going on? And I got a piece of paper, and I just started writing down what I was hearing in my head, and I'm looking at the paper going, Lord, do you really want me to say this?
Yeah.
And, I'm hearing, you speak this word for word. I'm giving you what I want you to say. So I get to the demonstration. I talked for 13 minutes, and then we did 2 minutes of karate. And the first words out of my mouth was, I'm standing up, and I have a board in front of me of all the grandmasters that were visiting there. And I'm not going to mention names, but the first words out of my mouth, I came here to shake the foundation of Eastern mysticism and martial arts.
Yeah.
And I watched one of the grandmasters literally start shaking. And my pastor was there. My whole school was surrounding the entire gymnasium and praying.
Yeah.
And it turned to pea soup. And I told them all, I said, if you're focusing on this mystical chi energy, you're a thief. You're stealing from the Holy Spirit. God created your body. If you're a farmer, you're going to develop your muscles to do farming. And you're going to be able to do that better than a strong person that does something else.
Yeah.
If you're a warrior, you're going to develop your body to be a warrior. I said, you can call it chi, you can call it whatever you want, but if you don't call it what it is, God gave us this amazing body to develop. If you don't call it what it is, you're a thief.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I stuck my arm out like this, and I had one of my students hit my arm with a half-inch piece of rebar, and it bent around my arm. I said, do you think that was chi energy? He said, no. I said, that hurt.
Yeah.
I said, but God has allowed me to be able to focus on this, develop my arm, condition it, and use the physics that he created in this world to let that bar hit me on the halfway point instead of at the end. If I had let it hit me on the end, it would have broke my arm.
Yeah.
I said, this is how martial arts works. It is physics that God created, not someone in the East. This is what God created. And we did a brief demonstration, and that was the end of it. And what I found was, of course, there were people that wouldn't even look at me for the rest of the tournament, but there were so many people that came up to me and that were saying, Master Pinder, I'm so happy you said that, because I was so scared to tell my church that I do martial arts, and now I can.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a fine line between doing something that with our God-given ability, and certainly whether you're a martial artist or a football player or an Olympic athlete, you can do some pretty amazing things. But there's also a line that I think we have to be careful not to cross. Where you see these demonstrations where somebody sends out key energy without touching someone, and then they fall over.
I'm not even going to mention names. I know the names.
Now, a lot of that is fake,
Yes.
but some of it might even be demonic. So I think as Christians, we kind of have to be careful how we delve into the whole idea of ki and chi energy. And I don't even like to use those terms. I talk about, um, power that we can develop, again, like you were talking about, physically and mentally. But as soon as you start talking about becoming one with the power of the universe, then you're into pantheism and Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a lot of Christians are afraid of. So I think as Christian instructors, we kind of have to be careful of how we explain things. So I think you did the exact right thing.
Well, thank you. I mean, like I said, I just repeated what I heard. And
Yeah.
all night long, I memorized it because I knew if I had changed his words, it wasn't going to be the same. If you use what he tells you to use, word for word,
Right.
it'll do what he wants it to do. Whether you see it right away, all we're doing as martial arts, as Christian martial arts artists, we're planting seeds.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Those seeds might not grow until someone down the line says something to them. God will put someone in their life to sprinkle a little water on that seed, and all of a sudden that seed's going to sprout up. And you'll have people come back to you years later. Said, I never understood what you had said to me, but all of a sudden it made sense. And they'll thank you for it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've been in the martial arts for so long now that I knew a lot of the people in the early days and the blood and guts days of karate. And now that I have known them for 60 years, so many of them have either turned back to the Lord or turned to the Lord, where they wouldn't have given him the time of day when they were, young competitors on the tournament circuit. And so it's kind of interesting how the Lord has slowly worked with people over the years. And so as believers, we can't just give up, whether you're witnessing to somebody and they're antagonistic, you just have to live the life. And ultimately they're going to turn back around and say, like you said, hey, 20 years ago, you had a point, because I've come to that realization now. So it's our job to plant the seeds.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're teaching a person to be violent, to have the capability of violence. I shouldn't say to be violent, to have the capability of violence, because truly you cannot say you're a peaceful person unless you're capable of extreme violence. You just, as a Christian, you know when to use it, when not to use it,
Right.
and only use it to the amount in which you need.
Yeah.
We're not trying to kill people. Unfortunately, we may have to someday, and I pray to God I never have to. I don't want to. Why would I want to hurt somebody?
Right.
So, but if you're not capable of extreme violence, and you have these people that go around going, I'm peaceful, and I ask them, are you capable of violence? Oh, no, I don't even believe in violence. Well, then you're not peaceful. You're harmless. There's a difference. So I would rather have someone capable of extreme violence who is a Christian and knows how to control it. I would rather have that person, we talked about this earlier, than someone who has no moral compass and they teach extreme violence too. And I would like to bring this up because we're coming up on this day soon. 9/11.
Yeah.
There were martial arts instructors that these terrorists came to, and they said, all I want to do is learn close combat knife fighting. And when the instructor was interviewed later, when they traced all this, and they was interviewed later, his reason was, well, they were quick learners and they paid in cash.
Yeah.
I am very cautious as to what I teach and who I teach it to. I am going to have to really get to know a student and trust them before we advance to that level where I'm truly teaching them how to quickly dispatch of somebody.
Oh, for sure. And I think that goes back to the tenets of the martial arts as well too.
Yep.
Self-control and self-discipline. I mean, one of my main instructors was Jun Rhee too, and he taught the whole idea of discipline and self-respect and respect for others. Mr. Rhee was a fascinating guy. I think he was a believer. We had many a spiritual discussion, but his culture came with him, from Korea. But I learned a lot from him, and he was a shining example of self-discipline and self-control. And so I still use those examples to my students when I teach them.
Now, my first instructor was a Catholic, was involved in the Knights of Columbus. He was a very, very involved Catholic.
Yeah.
But I think maybe where he lacked was having I'm trying to put this the right way.
Yeah.
The grace and mercy. I try to teach my students what grace and mercy is. Of course, grace is getting something you don't deserve, and mercy is not getting something you do deserve.
Yeah.
Okay, so he loved nothing more than to, invite. If he found out someone was a bully, he would get them into the class and he would put them up against someone, and the bully would get their butts kicked.
Yeah.
What did that do? And I went back to him with this, and I did because I was bullied when I was a kid. That's why I took karate.
Yeah.
I started when I was 13 because I was bullied. But what happened is after a year, I turned into a bully. And then it took me a little bit to understand where that cycle happens and how it happens. So I posed this question on the show, and I'm going to pose it to you. If you could only teach one how to defend themselves, would you teach the victim or the bully?
Well, how to defend themselves or teach martial arts?
Martial arts. We'll just say
I would
martial
teach
arts.
martial arts to the person that's prone to be a bully because you're teaching them self-control and respect for themselves and others. Yeah.
And this is going to sound terrible, but a lot of times a victim mentality will stay a victim mentality.
Oh, yeah.
But now, and I've seen this happen because I was able to teach karate in a charter school for high-risk kids. Most of the kids that were there had ankle bracelets on. So when I went to the school and we talked to them, and they said, Stephen, okay, I'm going to send you a bunch of students. And I said, well, what's the story with the students? He goes, these are a lot of the kids that have been bullied. I said, I don't want them. I said, I want your worst students, the ones that are the bullies. And he's like, are you kidding me? And I said, no. And I explained to him why. And I said, trust me. So out of these 15 kids that he gave me to teach, all 15 graduated high school and all but 2 went to college. But the greatest success, it wasn't that. And then I love that thought, because later on, when I was a school teacher at another school, they went on and they were in college. I would see them in the city and they would come up and say hi to me. But what I found out is that all those bullies, after they learned that self-respect, because a lot of these kids come from terrible homes. That's why they ended up this way.
For
But
sure.
they learned this respect, and they went to the kids that they were bullying, and they taught them on their own.
Well, that's the whole concept behind Chuck Norris's organization, Kickstart. And I was on the board of Chuck's organization for a number of years too. And so they go into inner city schools and yeah, they approach the school and say, we want to teach martial arts to these kids that are possible gang members and so forth. And the same reaction that you got there is like, well, there's no way we're going to teach these kids how to kick and punch. And of course, because of Chuck Norris's name, they invite the organization in, and they're able to incorporate discipline of the martial arts, and do the exact same thing you're talking about. So the Kickstart has a wonderful record of taking kids that were at risk of being juvenile delinquents, and they turn around and become college graduates. So yeah, and it's not just the
Amazing.
martial arts; it's the way the martial arts are taught.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know that there are people like the bad sensei from Karate Kid, whether it's the
Yeah.
movies or the TV show, and so some instructors just teach martial arts that way. Sweep the leg. But if they're taught the proper way with the proper attitude, and I'm not saying that you have to be a Christian in order to teach from the proper attitude, because I know a lot of non-Christian martial arts instructors who teach it the right way. But if you have that additional love for the Lord, it's certainly going to reinforce the way you teach and the way students respond to you. So I think that's a great combination of Christianity and the martial arts that you can really, in turn, and affect young people especially. And I've seen that over and over again over the years.
So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about when my school started going to tournaments.
Yeah.
I would tell them. Now, my students were hard fighters. They loved going to continuous contact tournaments.
Right.
My style of fighting probably suited that a little bit more than points fighting. I wasn't a very gracious fighter.
Yeah.
Just, my concept of fighting was condition your body to take whatever they throw at you and get yours. I like to knock people off balance by running into kicks.
Yeah.
Things like that. So we didn't fare too well in a lot of the points fighting. We won some, we lost some. A couple of my students won a tournament. But my rule was, and I used to catch flack from the parents. The parents would get upset at me. I would tell them, if you can't win without hurting them, lose.
Mm-hmm.
Don't win. There's nothing wrong with, I would rather you could have won that. Because what does it matter? If you know you could have won that fight, then what's the difference? You get a trophy?
Yeah.
A piece of plastic that you stick up on the wall? I got a bunch of those in the other room. They don't mean anything to me. It was the ones where I knew I could have wiped the floor with them. A very good friend of mine, we were in a continuous contact bout, and I could have won it. Grandmaster Choi from Corpus Christi was my referee in that fight. And I hit my friend with a reverse punch. And I watched his eyes roll back in his head. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
There was 10 seconds left in the fight. I could have just hit him with enough points. I was behind by about 2 points if you go by the, contact rule. And I just stood there. And that reached my students more than anything else I had ever done. They all saw it. And then after the fight, he was declared the winner, and he came up to me and he said, "Oh my God, Steve, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I heard glass break when you hit me in my head," he said. He goes, "I'm so glad, And he offered to give me the trophy. And I'm like, no, I don't want the trophy. There's no reason. And then Grandmaster Choi comes over. He goes, "Steve, you really won that fight." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "No, you should have you should have the trophy." He goes, "You won that fight." And I go, "It's just a piece of plastic." I go, "I know who won that fight. I know. I'm good."
Like you said, the trophy was the impact you had on your students who watched it.
Absolutely. They came to me after because all that preaching to them, and it was a mistake I made that I didn't pull enough back on that punch. I made the mistake. He came forward. I threw the punch. He went right into it. So it was just an accident. I wasn't going to capitalize on that. And that spoke volumes to them. And a year later, I'm fighting against another one of my friends from the Vovinam system. He's Vietnamese, third-degree black belt. He tried to do a tornado kick on me. And all I did was bring my leg up, and I trapped his leg accidentally. I didn't mean to do it. And he landed on his arm and broke his arm.
Oh.
And they were going to raise my hand. I said, no. And I knew what the answer was. And the crazy thing was, when I found out, I said, no, he was ahead on points, right? And they go, yeah. I said, give it to him. I bow out. I'm done. He was winning up until that accident happened.
Yeah.
And my students were all together watching this happen, and they said it amongst themselves. They said, Mr. Pinder isn't going to take that win. We know it. He's not going to take. They knew I wasn't going to take that win.
Yeah.
Because and there's a greater story to that too. After I have the videotape of it. His arm, you could see where it folded when he landed on it. And they took him to the hospital. All my students gathered around the ring. And I went up to him, and one of my friends who was a Buddhist came up there, and he was with me. And I said, Du is a Catholic. I said, can I pray over you? And he said, yes. And I prayed over him. I said, there is no break in this arm. And he's holding his arm. He goes, no, Steve, it's broken. I said, no, it's not. It's not broken. So he called us from the hospital later, and he said, Steve, they couldn't find a break in my arm. So my friend that was a Buddhist bought a Bible, and he went to Dallas Seminary School. You probably taught him.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking. And these are the things that I just sit back and I think about that, and I go, wow, that really happened. All those things that happened, it was impacts like that other people saw. Right. And when Boroboon was the student's name, he was he was from Laos. And he was a Buddhist, and he was right there when I prayed over him. And when we were sitting at dinner after, and we got the phone call from him saying his arm wasn't broken. And he goes, well, Steve, maybe it wasn't broken. And I pulled up the video because my friend was videoing it with my camera, and we went slow-mo, and we saw the arm fold. Yeah. Right. And he goes, you prayed over him. And I go, yeah. I go, my God heals things. This isn't the first time. And those are the impacts. Those are the things that I remember so much. All those that we think are failures, that we didn't get through to people, that we spoke and and you don't think it turned out. You don't know what seed you planted.
Oh, exactly. I will run into people in heaven that will surprise us. They'll come up to us and say, hey, remember that story, that example you had? It really made an influence on my life. And so I think we will indeed see the results of our labor later on. But all we have to do is just trust in the Lord. We have to be careful that we don't get the big head. And I think that's one of the dangers, frankly, of being a martial arts instructor. Whether you're breaking a stack of boards or winning a trophy or having people come up and bow to you, that you begin to think that you're a little bit more important than you are. And so it's really important that we keep our humble face on and, realize that everything we've got is from the Lord. He allows us to succeed. And we only do it because of his strength. And so I think that's a danger, whether you're a 10th degree black belt or an Olympic gold medal winner or a celebrity in Hollywood. It's pretty easy to begin to think that you're more important than you really are.
Yeah.
And so I think even though the martial arts is supposed to teach humility, I know a lot of martial artists have a problem with that sometimes.
Well, the one thing that I taught to all my black belts, I didn't have many, but I had a few, a handful. One thing I taught to them, I said, you may be, a teacher, but you're a servant.
Right.
More so than anything else. Now that you're a black belt, you serve. No one serves you. You serve them.
Hmm.
And there's something I'll share with you after. I don't talk about it live. It's something that only my black belts know. I'll talk to you about it after we get off the
Okay.
air.
All right.
But I think that's the one thing that I wanted to erase from my past, because even though my first instructor, he was a Christian, he was a Catholic, there was always this sense of sensei worship
Hmm.
where and I never understood that. Now I respected the man greatly because he taught me a lot of great life lessons.
Right.
But I think the lessons, I think he could have reached a lot more people. And and
Yeah.
and I and like I said, I can't knock the man. I know what he went through in his life. Um, military at that age, where he was, where he went.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things that he had to deal with, and I understand that. And he wasn't a very large person, so I know what high school must have been must have been like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there. That's why I started it. I was tired of getting picked on. So, you're tired of getting picked on, and then you take martial arts and
Yeah.
you get into one fight in school after that, and now everybody's afraid of you. That
Yeah.
bothered me. I didn't want people to be afraid of me. I just wanted some respect. So then like I said, that whole cycle that we talked about before happens. Now, did you ever have a problem like that?
As far as
Being bullied before you started martial
oh,
arts?
um, no, actually, I grew up in Richardson, went to Richardson High School, and even though I was a small person and I was more into the art club than the
Mm-hmm.
football team, and the guys that I hung around with, weren't jocks, but I have to say I was fortunate. I was never bullied. I got into the martial arts just because I thought it would be fun, not because I was being picked on or
Mm.
anything. And interestingly, in those days there weren't very many kids. I mean, I was 13, which
Well, that was
nowadays
extremely
seems like,
young. Now it's
yeah,
normal. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, in those days it was really young to be in karate class because the other people in Mr. Steen's class were all older teenagers and men in their 20s. And so I was like the youngest kid in the class. In fact, I was his youngest black belt when I earned a black belt in 1968 at the age of 17.
Yeah. I won't tell you how old I
Nowadays,
was.
you go into the average school and there's like 5-year-olds
Ugh.
out there. But in those days, yeah, there weren't very many kids at all. And so I wasn't bullied in the sense that, other people picked on me, but the other adults in the karate class just looked at me as the kid in the class. And in fact, Mr. Steen often said, I don't know how you managed to stick with it because you were one tough kid because I was fighting Skipper Mullins and Fred Wren, every week in school.
I don't even want
But
to imagine what that was like.
oh yeah, but interestingly, I'm the one of his black belts, maybe with the exception of myself and Roy Kerben, who continued to teach for decades and decades and decades afterwards. And Roy Kerben is a little bit older than me, but he was another kid in the class in those days in the Texas Karate Institute. So I think that kind of helped us stick with it because we were little kids fighting the big men, and we just were determined that they weren't going to be able to kick us out of the school.
Well, and I'm glad you started going into the children aspect of their involvement in karate.
Right.
Where I believe, and I never took a student under 6 years old. And
Yeah.
even at 6 years old, I didn't like to do it. Most of the time it's because they had an older sibling in class. Then I thought, okay, I'll do that. And my reasoning is, especially if you're trying to teach Christian principles, I think it's better with that because you have a guide
Yeah.
along with those principles. Now, if you try to teach some kid brought up in a secular house without any type of belief in God and Jesus, I think you have a harder time teaching what those morals truly mean, because it's like a map
Right.
without a compass. It's like reading the Bible without a relationship with Jesus. The Bible is the map, Jesus is the compass. That's where you
Right.
get the revelation from. When you're trying to teach martial arts without that foundation, to me, with the Christianity, without that foundation in it, you have a hard time with a child who hasn't fully developed their brain. I mean, we know that that brain isn't fully developed till their mid-20s.
Right.
So I think you have a harder time without teaching the Christian values by getting those moral principles across and those tenets, because you don't have a guide that reinforces it. You don't have these principles that from our Creator and His Son that reinforce those tenets. And I think that's why we may have a problem with some of the schools that don't teach that at all, that are completely on the secular or maybe even Eastern mysticism side. And I know I'm going to step on some toes here, and oh well. So, and
Well, it's interesting. The question that came up to me at the seminary was, well, aren't you're teaching martial arts and it has all this Taoism and so forth? And I often uh, would tell people that the average karate instructor can't even spell Taoism, let alone try to teach its tenets to people. Most karate instructors who are not believers are doing it from a purely secular standpoint, and they're not trying to incorporate Buddhist principles into your kids. But I think we have a responsibility as martial arts instructors, and certainly as Christian martial arts instructors, to understand, what Taoism is, what pantheism is, the whole concept of ki or chi, so that we can intelligently discuss it, and rather just say, oh, we don't do anything like that in our school. I think it may be because I had a career in higher education too. I think it's very important for us to do
mhm,
the study and again, be able to intelligently discuss
mhm.
it.
You know, that whole, and when you go back to the Taoism thing, when I try to explain to my students how important it is to meditate on the word,
Right.
and as soon as you use the word meditate, you get some pushback from people, and whoa, this is biblical to meditate on
Sure.
this.
Psalms 119 talks about
Yeah, I'm
meditation.
not teaching you to get in the lotus position, okay?
Yeah.
And smudge the room and no. There are certain things that help you quiet yourself. That
Mhm.
there's a pattern of things you can do to get yourself into a good state to where you can hear,
Yeah.
because that's the purpose of meditating, is to hear. Take all the other stuff out of the way, and get rid of it so you can clearly hear.
Hmm.
So, and I try to incorporate that and teach them how important that is. But it's like I said, as soon as you use the word meditate, you have to immediately, there's going to be some parent that comes from your church that's like, whoa, what are you teaching my kid? And you have to open up the Bible and go back to Joshua in, in, in,
Yeah.
in verse 1, where it says, read this night and day, meditate on it night and day.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And I'm teaching them how to do this. I'm not teaching them any Eastern mysticism or philosophies. That's not going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to see me um, do that in class. There's no commissar in my classroom,
Hmm.
which there was in my first school. There was a commissar with an incense burner and all the pictures of the lineage that was right
Yeah.
there. And we were told to bow to that. And I understand the bow of respect. I
Hmm.
understand that. I understand what that means. And it's a mutual respect. But when you add the teacher worship, the sensei worship that's in with
Right.
that, I mean, do you have students that put you on a pedestal higher than you think you should be?
Oh, for sure. For instance, I'll go to a tournament or a seminar and they'll say Grandmaster Yates, and My students do not use that term. I'm Mr. Yates, just like, Mr. Steen, Mr. Mullins, my instructors, and so forth. Of course, that was in the days before there were grandmasters in the
Mm-hmm.
martial art. But, Mr. is fine with me. I don't
So,
put
it's
grandmaster on the
funny
back of
because,
my uniform and insist everybody call me that and so forth.
and, and
And again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not putting down people that like to use that term,
it,
but I think it's thrown around a little bit too
yeah,
much because again, there's that danger of people coming up and going, "Oh, Grandmaster." In fact, here's another
yeah.
story. Here's another story. June Reed was coming into town, and I picked him up from the airport, took him to the hotel. He actually wasn't feeling good at the time. This was when he was first developing shingles. And so, I took him to his hotel room and I said, "Is there anything you need, sir?" And he goes, "I would like some bananas." So I went, "Okay." So I rushed and found the nearest grocery store and brought it back to the room. And, and said, "Sir, here are the bananas." And he said, "Oh, I feel so bad making the professor be my houseboy." And I said, "No, sir, you're my senior and, I'll do whatever you need." And so he was very aware that even though he had asked me to do something, I went and did it. He said, "Oh, I don't want you to serve me." And I said, "No, I'm really happy to do that." And so I think there's that level of respect, like I said, that we have in the martial arts, but it's not a level of worship. It's
Yeah.
respect for our
And
seniors.
before
And,
anybody,
you know what the word sensei means in Japanese, what the literal translation is?
I was always told honorable teacher.
It means one who has traveled further down the path. So, in other words, it's somebody that has more life experience than you, someone who has experienced things and they can share their experience with you and help you walk the walk, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. So, it doesn't mean teacher per se. It has more of the idea
Yeah.
of a mentor, somebody that can show you by way of example how to live your life.
I'm glad you say that. Now, right underneath you on the screen, you don't see it. On my screen, it says Grandmaster Keith Yates. Keith G. Yates.
Okay.
And under my screen, it says Master Steve Pinder, which kind of, and I put it up
And
there.
that's okay. Again,
No. What I'm saying is, it's always. I never had my students ever refer to me as that. It
yeah,
was a different name. It was a Hebrew name called Modrik, which means guide or counselor. That's all that means
yeah,
in Hebrew.
yeah.
But when I first started doing this back in 2005, the person that got me doing this for the Hall of Fame was like, "Steve, you need to use Master Steve Pinder because people respect you more."
Yeah.
And I did, and I started using it, and I look at it every time I do this show, and I go, one of these days, I just need to take that down. Because
Well, that's okay because it's an earned title.
yes, it
And
is earned.
there's a whole controversy as who's a grandmaster and who isn't, depends on the organization and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with using that as a title as
Yeah.
long as you don't insist upon your students
Oh
going, "Oh,
no.
grandmaster,"
No.
instead of just
That,
saying, "Hey, Mr. Pender."
mm-hmm. Yep, it was.
Or even, I'll have students sometimes might even say professor, since I was
Mm-hmm.
a literal professor. I have some students, seminary students as well as martial arts students say, "Hey, professor." And
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's okay too. I do have a problem with people who don't have a legitimate higher education degree touting themselves as professor so and so. So, but let's not go down that
No,
road.
no. We're good. I know. Yeah, we're good. So yeah, and my students never called me Master Pinder. It was
Yeah,
always Sensei, Modrik, Mr. Pinder.
sure.
I loved it. One of my Chinese students loved calling me Coach.
Yeah.
Coach. And that used to make my day, when
Yeah.
he would call me Coach. And it
Mhm.
was, as long as it was respectful and it wasn't
Exactly.
Yo Pinder, you know?
Right.
That's fine because, there's a certain, and I never referred to my students and I would never, when someone would say Mr. Pinder, I'd turn around and go, "Yes, sir."
Yeah.
I refer to my students. It's just a respect thing. You want respect, you give respect. But,
Exactly.
one of these days I'm going to take that down. I mean,
No, it's
I know,
okay.
I have the title.
As long as you don't embroider it on the back of your gi.
No, it was never. That's why I was.
And some schools have it on their students. So it's like Master Pender student on the back of the uniform. So I'm not only am I calling myself a master, but I'm making my students say that they're students of the master.
Yeah. No.
Okay, and again, I don't want to offend anybody, but
No, I mean, look, it's your people are going to get offended, and today's day and age, they get offended for so many things.
yeah,
But if I can't speak what I believe and what I know, then and I don't, whatever anybody else wants to say, if they do some kind of a show and they might want to call themselves professor or whatever, they can, that's up to them. I just, there's enough infighting going on. I don't need to bring it into my world any more than it's already there. So
for sure. All we can do is live out our own faith and our own life and be an example as the Lord leads us.
mhm.
And I think any martial artist, but especially Christian martial artists, need to really have that in the forefront.
I would think so. Now we're about 50 minutes into this, sir. Is there anything else that you want to bring up before we close this out? Because I think we've brought up a lot of topics. I
Right.
think there's a lot of people that are going to probably send emails. Now, what I can do is there a website where they can get your books from?
Yeah, most of my books are on Amazon. In fact, the one I'll reach behind me here, Martial Arts and Christianity, is on Amazon.
Okay.
As well as many of my other books.
I will.
But if you're
I'll try
particularly
to.
interested in that one, you can find that on Amazon. And I also would recommend Mat Time by Jenny Tyler, which has got the Christian devotionals that she uses in her karate classes.
Okay.
And I can highly recommend that too. And there's the Gospel Martial Arts Union. You can go to gmau.org. And again, our national conference is in a couple of weeks. It's probably hard to go up to Indianapolis unless you're living in that part of the country right now. But we have local seminars sometimes, and so I'll let you know when that happens. And we have guest instructors that come in and teach. So there are a lot of avenues that are for Christian martial artists to get support from.
And what I'll try to do is put a lot of links in the show notes to where they can get your books.
Sure.
And we'll talk about that after the show, after we close this thing out, and and we can get all that up within the show notes, and they'll be able to link and purchase your books there. Maybe we'll put a link in there to maybe your Facebook page or wherever you advertise that you're going to be teaching, doing seminars.
Sure.
If I can tell everybody out there, if you're a Christian and you want to learn from a Christian martial artist, then I would say learn from Mr. Keith Yates. And I've known you, sir, just in passing mostly. We've probably been at a few seminars here and there, or a few gatherings where we've talked. Nothing but respect for you, sir. How you represent yourself in and out of the dojo has always been to that higher standard that we can always strive to achieve, sir.
In fact, my latest book is called Out of the Dojo.
There you go.
So, you see it right back here. So
very good. So we can get all those links in there. And if you want to just hang on there, I will close the show out, and we can talk for a few minutes after.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Everybody, thank you for being here on Martial Art Masters of Texas. Make sure you look in the show notes, and you're going to get links to all of Mr. Yates' books and some of the others that he recommended. So until next time, everyone, be strong. God bless.